Messieurs les ambassadeurs, dear friends and colleagues and ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much to all of you for responding in such large numbers to our invitation, since we, if I am correct, we are at the moment more than 110 people in the room, which is great, and I'm sure that other colleagues and friends will join us in a few minutes. I'm Benjamin Hautecouverture, Senior Research Fellow at the Fondation pour la Recherche Stratégique, Foundation for Strategic Research in Paris. And we are together today for about an hour and a half. As you all know, the P5 process between China, France, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States is a forum of dialogue, which was established in 2009 to enable discussion among nuclear weapon states of the major issues at stake in the NPT review process. And today we will have an informal and very open and free exchange of views about the NPT and in the NPT review process, the role and the usefulness of the P5 process. And the FRS, la Fondation, has been tasked with accompanying the ongoing French presidency of the P5 with the aim of fostering debates between governmental and non-governmental experts. Through this project, we are organizing regular seminars, well, hopefully in sometimes seminars, real seminars, at the moment webinars, on key issues related to the NPT and to its review process. We are also publishing, as many of you already know, food for thought papers and analytical pieces on related topics written by our experts within the Fondation, as well as by invited contributors. And for such contribution, if you are interested, you of course are very welcome to reach out to my colleague Emmanuel Maître or I at the Fondation. Greater transparency is proposed on the activities of the P5 and the state of the debates among nuclear weapon states. And this project is also a platform to enrich the discussion on key issues related to the NPT, as we know, the 10th review conference of the treaty is currently postponed. It enables networking and exchanges between established practitioners or academics and young researchers, our idea being also to favor the emergence of new voices on key topics such as education, classic non-proliferation, I would say, the role of the P5, of course, verification, strategic risk reduction, or the various challenges linked to the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. And last year, we held 4 webinars on the postponement of the review conference first, on 50 years of NPT history, on peaceful uses related issues with distinguished representatives in Vienna, and also on the role of the European Union in the current review cycle. And you can find the recordings of these past events on our program page on the FRS website. This dedicated page has been online for a few days now. We are today resuming our series to specifically accompany the P5 process exercise. We will hold other events by the end of this year, 2021, and in particular around the so-called Conference of the Principles when it is held. And without further ado, I will now turn the floor over to our three guests for, again, a very free exchange of views on the P5 process in the context of the NPT review cycle. A view from a P5 country with the permanent representative of France to the Conference on Disarmament, Ambassador Yan Wang. A view from a European NPDI member country with Ambassador Gabriel C. for the Netherlands, and the perception of a young researcher from King's College London who, remember, accompanied the UK's P5 presidency in 2019. Thank you, Ms. Jenny Pong, to be with us today. So we have about an hour and a half to discuss the value of the P5 process in moving the NPT agenda forward, in holding the nuclear armed countries to their particular responsibilities as nuclear weapon states, and in hearing the voices of civil society in this regard. First, Ambassador Wang, as you know, it can be heard here and there that the P5 is a closed forum, is something like a club, defending its interests in the treaty review process. But a lot has been done since its inception 11 years ago. What assessment can be made of the process, about its longevity, its resilience also in the face of a particularly deleterious strategic environment over the past decade? To put it in journalistic terms, if I may, is the P5 forum the last place where the great powers talk to each other about strategic matters? The floor is yours for about 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
No, thanks to you, and good morning, good afternoon, all participants, even if I can see you on my screen. Thanks, Benjamin. First, I would like to congratulate you for the timing, scheduling this webinar today, coincidentally with the Putin-Biden summit, which is taking place next door, is a real performance. So let's, and did you know that disarmament could be in the agenda of on these high-level talks. So this is a performance, and let's say that this webinar is somewhat the side event of this summit. So let's start and answer your question. But before answering your question, maybe I can, as a means of introduction, say some few words on the history of the P5 process. First, for those who don't know, France is currently chairing the P5 process. We took over from the UK in September 2020, and before that from China. The P5 is currently working on the implementation of a roadmap that we agreed in 2019 in London, which includes 5 work strands on doctrines, on strategic risk reduction, glossary, FMCT, Bangkok Treaty, Treaty on nuclear weapon-free zone in Southeast Asia, and peaceful users. I won't elaborate too much on that, but I will be happy to answer your question later, if any, on that very important work. But the aim today is not so much to, well, as I said, to talk about the implementation of this roadmap, but to have an open exchange on how the P5 works or should work with the outside world. You said that at the beginning of your presentation that the P5 is somehow perceived as something closed, secretive, or opaque. I think we need to demystify what we are doing there. And it's very important. And I think it's the raison d'être of this series of seminars. Now, what do we have in common with the P5? Well, first, we have nuclear weapon states as recognized by the NPT. And it will be very complicated to explain that the P5 do not work. To say differently, if the P5 wouldn't have existed, it would have been real loopholes, you know, and it is clear that we would have been blamed for that. So it exists and it works. And we need also, what we need to do is to overcome this perception that we are doing something to defend our own interest. What we are doing is trying to provide solutions to implement better the NPT in the three pillars. The P5 was created in 2008, so it has a long history. It was a bit chaotic at the beginning, but now we can say that it's more regular, more systemic, and more institutionalized. Even if there is no formal, it's not a formal process. We meet on a regular basis at different levels. It's not a formal body, but it is more or less something which is now well known and institutionalized. When the UK Defence Secretary at the Conference on Disarmament created the P5 process, the idea was to discuss the common NPT obligations. And at the beginning, the stakes was to verifying the dismantlement of nuclear arsenals. And although very quickly it became clear the proposal was part of a wider confidence building initiative. So as I said, it remains something informal, but in the other hand, and it is my personal experience because I am in this position, I have been in this position for 3 years, and I can give you, I can assure you that it is a regular and very well-structured process. Our concrete achievement with the P5 in the past, very quickly, we succeeded to agree on a P5 reporting template. It's not insignificant. You know, we can say that, okay, this is a minimum, but this is something that it's not evident because it's not obvious because we have different capacities, different doctrines, different perception or interpretation of what it is to report to the NPT. But this is an achievement, and we are trying to do a little bit more on that regard when it comes to report. We agreed to hold doctrines side events on the margin of the next RevCon, which is also something which was without precedent. As I said, we think that we have to make a special effort on transparency, which is a part of mutual trust and confidence. And what we would like to do, coming back to doctrines, is really to reaching greater understanding on each other's doctrines and continue to having a frank conversation about nuclear doctrines, which is very important to avoid any misunderstandings and misperceptions. Exchange of doctrines is a real risk reduction exercise. we are doing that in a regular basis at different levels, at expert levels, but also at principals levels. And it's very important to stress this important add value for the P5 and important contribution. Our objective now to be a little bit much more details of what we want to achieve for a successful RevCon. Well, to be short, what we want to do is to offer concrete proposals for a successful RevCon in the 3 pillars. We want to provide our views, what could be the best way to improve the NPT implementation. And to do that, it will be a bit weird that if the P5 won't propose a P5 views on the different pillars and on different issues which are discussing currently, like strategic reduction, for example. On strategic risk reduction, we are striving to propose a P5 views on this concept for which there is no international understanding so far. And beyond the RevCon, because after the RevCon, there will be something else to do, because we need to look beyond the RevCon. What we like to do is to continue the, of course, exchange of views on doctrines at the minimum, continue this important work on strategic risk reductions, and perhaps to enlarge the agenda to other issues, because, as I said, this is the only and single forum where P5 principles meet on a regular basis. There is no other places that there is this regular rendezvous. So I think there is a room to make this platform a sort of a platform for bringing further add value for strategic stabilities in general. Now, second question, and I will stop there because it's the question that, and this is a topic of the day, how does the P5 work with stakeholders outside the P5? How can we make it better to cooperate? The P5 can cooperate with other stakeholders like the civil society. As you know, the P5 brief NPDI after each rendezvous. It's very important. So we debrief what we have done, what is the outcome of a discussion, and we try to enhance and foster our cooperation with NPDI on various aspects of NPDI work, like transparency. You know that my country has initiated similar dialogue with initiatives seeking to advance nuclear disarmament and the objective of NPT. I'm thinking of stepping stones. I don't know if there's an appetite to make it more regular, but the French view is that it could be possible also to enlarge this regular cooperation between P5 and stepping stones, but it requires a P5 agreement, and it is under discussion. With civil society, as you know, the UK started innovative civil society work during its presidency of the P5 process, and it allowed the King College of London and the ELN to explore common ground, and it was, I think, a good, an excellent initiative, and with a lot of results, some results, and I would like to say, I think we need to continue this sort of regular exchanges with civil societies, meaning academics, research centers, think tanks, etc., and why not the media? Because we firmly believe that it is important to well, as you said, Benjamin, not to maintain this perception that we are plotting on our side, but we are cooperating with all interested stakeholders. So to conclude, the P5 is a CBM, but it's not only a CBM, it's an operational platform to dispel any misunderstanding, concerns regarding doctrines. It is a platform where we try to contribute and to bring add value for the NPT implementation in the 3 pillars. And it's also an open door for a dialogue with the civil society. And when I say civil society, I mention the civil society in general, the broad civil society. Sorry, maybe I was a little bit too long, but it's what I wanted to say. And I'm very happy to answer your questions or to listen comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Wong. No, you were not too long at all. And thank you very much for this very direct vision of the P5 from within the mechanism. The P5 within the NPT Forum, you said, is an informal initiative, though it is, you emphasized, a regular and well-structured process. Risk reduction is at the heart of the purpose and whatever the means. And I picked up 2 very important ideas, I think. First, the fact that, according to you, there are no other places for regular rendezvous as far as strategic dialogues are concerned among the P5 and nuclear weapon states. Countries like specified, emphasized Ambassador Treza in our chat during your talk. And second, you also summarized the whole idea, saying that the P5 is a CBM and an operational platform and an open door for dialogue. So this is, I think, very specific. The point now is to what extent your vision is shared by countries outside the mechanism. And Ambassador Gabriel C., you are speaking on behalf of, first, a European state, second, a state very much concerned with nuclear issues, in particular peaceful, as far as peaceful uses are concerned, and a participating state, the NPTI, which has submitted around 15 working papers for deliberation by the Preparatory Committee of the WEFCON since 2015. So my question is, how do you see the role of the P5 within the NPT review process, its usefulness, but also its flaws, and also its shortcomings, maybe? Ambassador Gabriel C., the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hautecouverture, and give me the virtual floor. I will, like Ambassador Yang Wan, say a few remarks and your question, and hopefully the answer will come back in my answer. I must say it's a real pleasure to speak today at this webinar. As you said, a representative of a European country, but certainly as a representative of the Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Initiative group of states, with the abbreviation NPDI. We are very grateful for this opportunity given to our views on the P5 process in the run-up to the NPT review process. And I must say my compliments to la Fondation de la Recherche Stratégique to put this topic on the agenda today. As Jan said, something is going on next door. And I'm also very pleased that my good colleague, Ambassador Wang, is here today, speaking on behalf of the P5. You could not have a better spokesman. And I'm also very pleased to see a young academic being part of us. First of all, because she's interested. So it's really good nowadays when there are so many other topics which gets our attention, that young people, and certainly a woman, is interested in this topic, because we need more women in this field. So thank you very much to be online, and I'm really interested in your critical following of what we are saying. So I'm really interested in your introductory remarks. For those that are less familiar with the NPDI, this is a cross-regional group of states within the framework of the NPT that focuses on practical steps that will promote the consensus outcomes since the 2010 NPT Review Conference. You already mentioned that in your introduction. And I think it was in September of that year that on a ministerial level, these countries came together. And this group consists of, it's a very diverse group of countries: Canada, Chile, Germany, Philippines, Mexico, Nigeria, Poland, Turkey, UAE, Australia, Japan, and my own country, the Netherlands. And currently my country has the honor to coordinate the work of the NPDI. We welcome this seminar and the continued engagement with the P5, even though there is still no certainty regarding the dates of the 10th NPT Review Conference. We should take advantage of the postponement of the RevCon and use this time to continue our work on the different strands of the NPT. The NPDI has served as an important platform when it comes to substantive policy for the implementation of disarmament and non-proliferation obligations under the NPT. The fact that not all member countries are like-minded on every topic can sometimes be conceived as a weakness of the NPDI, but we believe it's mostly a strength. It will take time to reach agreement within this group, but the compromises generally resonate well within the wider NPT community. The NPDI, as a group of non-nuclear weapon states with a constructive attitude and willingness to take responsibility, positions itself as a bridge builder between the nuclear weapon states and the other more disarmament-oriented countries. To give an example of the work of the NPDI, it intends to submit a working paper with recommendations relating to the 3 pillars of the NPT for consideration of the 10th Review Conference. The NPDI has been requesting feedback on the current draft for many states parties, including the P5. In October 2020, the NPDI also wrote an open letter to the nuclear weapon states under the NPT. And I will touch upon, if you allow me, on a few elements in that letter in my intervention. Whilst the international security environment is rapidly deteriorating, with agreements and norms that have contributed to our collective security among the major casualties, we urgently need to recommit to finding multilateral solution, engaging in dialogue, and building confidence. In this context, the NPDI welcomes the reaffirmation in the P5 joint statement of the 10th March 2020 of the nuclear weapon states' commitment to the NPT in all its aspects, including to the pursuit of good faith negotiations on effective measures related to nuclear disarmament and on a treaty on general and complete disarmament under strict and effective international control. We must remind ourselves that a world without nuclear weapons is the ultimate goal of the balanced implementation of the 3 pillars of the NPT. Nuclear weapon states share a special responsibility for reaching that objective by implementing the obligations under Article 6 of the treaty and by taking concrete steps towards disarmament. The P5's determination and positive leadership will be essential in order to fully realize the NPT's objectives. In that light, the NPDI reaffirms its resolve to fulfill the NPT commitments and obligations. This is why we submit a joint working paper with a broad set of recommendations for adoption to the 10th Review Conference. As a measure to ensure the NPT remains fit for purpose in the decades ahead, we will propose to strengthen the NPT review cycle, including through the establishment of a process mandated to take decisions to this end. We ask for the P5 supports for these NPDI initiatives. Consistent with the commitments announced in the NPDI's joint statement 23rd November 2019 in Nagoya, Japan, we will continue to pursue greater transparency, and Jan was also talking about this, which is necessary for the implementation of the NPT and build trust and confidence at regional and international levels. The collective commitment of the nuclear states has been valuable in this regard. We welcome the national implementation reports that have been released so far and continue to encourage nuclear weapon states to submit their respective reports well in advance of the review conference. And Jan was already alluding to the format which is being used, which is important, but it's also important that all the nuclear states send in their reports in time. In the months ahead of the review conference, the NPDI would like to invite the P5 to resume and deepen the dialogue among each other and with all parties of the treaty, including partners from the NPDI, to discuss the proposal mentioned in the letter and other constructive ways forward. We wish to underline that the pandemic does not suspend the provisions of the NPT, nor has it diminished the challenges to the treaty or the NPDI's resolve to address them. The group is committed to working with the P5 and all the NPT states parties to generate new political momentum with a view to strengthening the regime established by the NPT and advance its goals. We stand ready to continue to work with you all in the month ahead to strengthen the NPT, the cornerstone of the nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation regime. And again, thank you very much, Mr. Hautecouverture. And I'm really looking forward to the last intervention. And I do hope it can be a critical one, and she will challenge us both very much. And thank you very much for the invitation.
Merci beaucoup, Ambassador. And I also hope that Jamie will do her best and will do her role of representative of the academy, the think tanks, the research centers, to be provocative and to criticize all this structure. And Ambassador, you emphasized the fact that a world without nuclear weapons is the ultimate goal of all these efforts, including the P5 process. And it's worth recalling indeed. And to strengthen the NPT framework will be key in the future, you said, and you concluded by saying that the NPDI is committed to work with the P5, which is in our days a really good news. I would now like to give the floor indeed to my young colleague, Jamie Kwong from King's College, London, to give us, Jamie, if I may, some feedback on the role of civil society and in particular within civil society research centers during the UK presidency of the P5 2 years ago, a role that was specifically entrusted at the time to King's London and to the European Leadership Network, who is in the room. Hello to our good colleagues from the ELN, whom I would like to invite to intervene in the course of our discussion in order to add to Jamie's viewpoint, of course. And in particular, the project at the time was meant to have three impacts: on policy, on transparency, and on diversity inclusion. Would you say in all these three aspects that your action was a success, Jamie? Thanks.
Sure, I'd be happy to comment. And just to begin, thanks so much to the ambassadors for their insightful remarks. And of course, the Benjamin, Emmanuel, and the FRS team for putting on this event and inviting me to speak. So similar to the ambassadors, I'll give a bit of background and hopefully address some of these questions while doing so, but please do prompt me in the Q&A if I haven't done so successfully. But as mentioned, in 2019 and 2020, I worked on a joint King's College London and European Leadership Network project entitled NPT Success in the P5 process. And so it was led by Heather Williams at KCL and Shada Shetty at ELN, and funded by the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office, which I just want to say off the bat, much credit goes to the FCO for providing us critical support while also giving us the freedom and flexibility to steer the project, which I think was really important. So just in these brief remarks, I want to cover three key areas. First, just give you a bit of a background on what the goals of the project were, then discuss some of the project outcomes, and finally, hopefully to Benjamin's questions, some reflections on the civil society and P5 process. And so hopefully I will demonstrate that civil society participation in the P5 process is a beneficial and worthwhile endeavor that helps to increase P5 transparency, inject new ideas and momentum into the process, and ultimately encourage greater progress on the P5's NPT obligations. So first, to begin with the goals of the project. Ultimately, we wanted to investigate challenges and opportunities for the P5. So that included analyzing issues faced by the P5 states and within their dialogues. So we aimed to identify areas for cooperation that, importantly, were both ambitious but also pragmatic. And so throughout, we offered expert guidance and recommendations for the P5 at the NPT Review Conference, which at the time was 3 months away. And we held 3 meetings of international experts to do so. So first, we had a track 2 dialogue, which included participants from the P5 states, some additional European states, as well as India and Pakistan. And I believe there's a question on that, which I'm happy to address later. Second, we held a track 1.5 dialogue, which only had participants from the P5 states. And then finally, as alluded to earlier, we held a civil society event as part of the official P5 meeting in London in February 2020. And so this was a really large audience of 80 civil society participants from both the P5 states and non-nuclear weapon states. And importantly, as part of that event, we conducted breakout groups, which allowed our participants to have more direct engagement with the P5 delegations. We also had a plenary where we tasked the P5 delegates to discuss 5 key issue areas that are track 2 and track 1.5 events identified as particularly relevant. So some of this is reflected on the current P5 agenda and some more additional areas. So we had strategic risk reduction, doctrines, transparency, RevCon 2020, which is a bit outdated now, and RevCon 2025. So what actually happened from the project are our outcomes. So first and foremost, we helped to build a network of experts and officials engaged in nuclear and P5 specific issues, some of whom I'm glad to say are on the call today. And we also included a portion of our events dedicated to showcasing talent from next generation specialists across the P5 states. It was really important for us to include these voices in these discussions. Additionally, we were particularly successful in encouraging further transparency within the P5 process, both among the P5 states and to the wider NPT community. Some really positive feedback from our civil society participants who especially enjoyed the breakout sessions as opportunities to interface directly with the P5 delegations. And we also received positive feedback from the delegates, which is always good. So for example, the UK ambassador to the Conference on Disarmament, Aidan Little, called our event bigger and better than ever, and that it helped to embed this civil society engagement in the NPT process. But ultimately, as I mentioned before, it was important for us that we developed realistic and politically feasible recommendations. And so these are discussed in detail in our project report, which I'm happy to link to in the chat, but I'll provide a brief overview here. So we touched on 4 key areas, some of which have already been discussed as they are already on the P5 agenda. So the first was on doctrines and strategic stability. So we recommend that the P5 continue their existing work in this area as it's a key transparency and trust building effort. Greater clarity on doctrines helps to avoid miscalculations and escalation and can help promote strategic stability. We also recommended that the P5 start exploring the impact of emerging technologies and those technologies' impacts on strategic stability. And a key opportunity here would be to integrate track 2 experts from the private sector who are experts in these technologies to help contribute to those discussions. But importantly, these multilateral discussions need to be complemented with bilateral dialogue. So there's some topics that are particularly sensitive and others are relevant to the whole group. So it's really important to pair work in the multilateral forum with additional bilateral efforts. Second, on strategic risk reduction, first and foremost, we recommend that developing a common understanding of the lexicon is key. There's different perspectives on what nuclear risks entail and which tools are effective for actually reducing those risks. And so there's opportunities to build on existing efforts in this area already. For example, UNIDIR is a key risk reduction leader. So drawing on some of their work and reports and additional European efforts demonstrate an opportunity to engage with some non-nuclear weapon states. For example, I'd refer you to the Stockholm Initiative's recent paper on risk reduction as a great example. And the P5 can also take some good faith pledges, pledging a no quantitative buildup and reiterating a commitment to a testing moratorium. Third, as still relevant because RevCon hasn't happened, we discussed expectations for RevCon. So I'd argue that the report's recommendations are especially important given these delays and the entry into force of the TPNW. So it'll be even more critical that the P5 clearly demonstrate their commitment to the NPT, and especially Article 6, and be willing to work cooperatively with non-nuclear weapon states for a positive outcome. So some good faith efforts can include being transparent about the challenges in the P5 process. It's not a perfect forum, but it is a great one. So how can we communicate that a bit better? Celebrate the NPT upon its 50th anniversary and set out a vision for the next 50 years. And importantly, don't actively denigrate the TPNW or its proponents. And the final area we touched on was the future of the P5 process. So again, it's important for the P5 to try to recapture some of the momentum that it gained from 2019 and early 2020 meetings, especially if RevCon is delayed further. So I'm excited that these FRS forums are great opportunities to do so. And what could this look like? It could include engagement with other relevant forums. There's no need to recreate the wheel. And that also provides an opportunity to engage with non-nuclear weapon states and civil society because transparency matters. And finally, also the P5 can highlight their leadership in peaceful uses and non-proliferation. So just to conclude with my opening remarks, I want to touch on kind of my reflections on civil society and the P5 process more broadly. So as discussed, a critical goal of establishing the forum was to build confidence between its members. And by including civil society in key aspects of the forum, this is only expanding that confidence building. So civil society participants at the February event, for example, commended the P5 for their frank and inclusive dialogue on some of the NPT's most significant challenges. But there were some participants who also voiced concern over this exercise being used as a deflection and concerns about the lack of political will among the P5. So continued efforts to expand the confidence building effects of the forum is really important. And again, more important now more than ever with the entry into force of the TPNW, increasing tensions among the P5 states, all of which are really only exacerbating the divide between nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states. And as I said at the off, I think that civil society can inject new perspectives and momentum into the P5 process. We need to be reminded that the P5 is not a monolith. While often discussed in the NPT context collectively, these states have competing concerns and interests. And there's a diversity of opinion and priorities, not only amongst, but within the P5 states. So it's hard to expect a fully united front on NPT issues. So civil society participation through our project helped to identify areas of potential cooperation as outlined in our recommendations. But I would caution here that we have to be careful not to overtask the P5 process itself. We need to think critically about which issues to prioritize, which are best suited for the multilateral forum, and which may fall out of the process's NPT and disarmament remit. Because finally, ultimately, the P5 process is not a perfect forum. There are some valid frustrations with its slow progress over the last decade and concerns over the seemingly insurmountable differences between the P5. But nevertheless, it's a critical forum for fostering dialogue between the NPT nuclear weapon states. So civil society should be doing all it can to support that forum and encourage greater transparency and progress. So I'm very encouraged to see that FRS will be continuing this important work by hosting this and further events during the French chairmanship. I'll go ahead and conclude there. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Jamie. And thank you very much for being very specific about the recommendations you made when accompanying the process last year, 2 years ago. And I take note of that idea that prioritization of issues is absolutely necessary within the P5, which indeed is not meant to deal with all the issues linked to the NPT implementation. And there are so many things to add and to open now, and indeed we have many questions in the Q&A and in the chat of our platform. Maybe I will, well, naturally, we have more questions directly asked to the French representative, since Ambassador Wang talk on behalf of one of the P5 members, and other questions, other more general questions. I don't know if we will have time to address all these questions, but the good news is that we still have like 40 minutes, which is good. So we can launch a real discussion among ourselves. Let me first pick up, well, some questions are very provocative, other are very technical or specific. I will try to balance between questions to Ambassador Wang and questions to all our panel, okay? So Sebastian Bruxelles-Williams, who is a very good fellow and a good colleague from BASIC, thanks all the speakers, and he added that he would like Ambassador Wang to ask him if he might be able to say a bit more on what kind of further cooperation he would like to see with the Stepping Stones approach or Stockholm initiative. Indeed, Ambassador Wang welcomed, as far as France is concerned at least, a dialogue with the Stepping Stones approach. Maybe Ambassador Wang, could you be a little more specific about it? And I will add another question by our good colleague Andrei Baklitsky to Ambassador Wang. For a couple of years, he says, already on the agenda of the P5 sits the statement that the nuclear war cannot be won and should not be fought, as we all know. And for a while, Trump administration was stonewalling it, but we have a new administration in the US and so on and so forth. So he concluded, with Russia, US and China on board, would France have a problem in finally subscribing to this statement and maybe delivering it during its presidency? So this is a second specific question, and maybe I will add a third one for all our panel, which is a question no, I will pick up the Aline Ware question, who is for Ambassador Gabriel C. Aline Ware asked, there is a growing momentum supporting the adoption of no first use policies. And by the way, there are other questions related to these no first use policies, of course, by nuclear armed states. Although it does not seem possible to get all the P5 to adopt NFU by this upcoming NPT Review Conference, what do you think, he adds, about NFU agreements between NATO and Russia, similar to the bilateral NFU agreement between Russia and China? And this is a last third question from Aline Ware to Ambassador Gabriel Say. And I will stop here for the first wave of questions. Maybe Ambassador Wang, you start.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, okay, sorry, I had some technical problems. I will maybe start, thank you very much for questions from participants. And I will start with the last one that you raised, Benjamin, which is Reagan and Gorbachev statement. Thank you for the question. It's an old question, and it's a very well known. The French position is well known. First, we have no problem with statements like that. Of course, the problem is that per se, I will say, but the problem is that first, this statement was delivered in a very specific period, which was the Cold War. And in a geostrategic text, which was very, very specific. And in 2021, no one can say that the geostrategic context is the same. It's completely different. So this is the first observation. The second observation is that we need to see if these type of statement would be or could be compatible with our respective doctrines. And this is something, which is normal. We check if this type of language is consistent with our doctrines. Regarding the French doctrines, we even don't recognize the nuclear war concept. We think that deterrence will not allow any kind of nuclear war in general. So we think that there is an incompatibility here. But anyway, that's something which is worth exploring from a legal point of view. But the third observation I will make is that having a statement is fine, but it's not a magic trick to resolve the problem of nuclear disarmament or to resolve the problem of being sure that nuclear weapons won't be used in any case. And on that last point, I mean, the most important is to have an exchange of doctrines and to make sure that all relevant doctrines are completely elaborated, articulated, transparent enough with a certain level of ambiguity, which is the essence of deterrence, of course, in order to avoid any use of nuclear weapons. So doctrines is very important, and I'm trying to explain that because otherwise, if we think that having a pure, very short statement will resolve every problem, will, I think, a mistake. So where are we now on this statement? I don't know what the US administration will adopt, what will be the position of the new US administration. Maybe we'll have a news today, I don't know. But what I can tell you is that we are working on a statement, P5 statement, in order to give this reassurance to non-nuclear weapon states and to the international community in general. Now, on stepping stones, thank you for Sebastian's questions. Well, I will be very short. We saw the Stepping Stones initiative and the statements issued by at ministerial level. Our thought in Paris was that, well, it was this is fine because we are back to basics, you know, meaning that nuclear disarmament is a question of, it's a gradual approach, it's a progressive approach, it's a practical approach. And to achieve a world without nuclear weapons, we need to come back to this very important approach. Otherwise, we will go into a deadlock. So we have sympathy with stepping stones, and we think that it could be interesting for the P5 to have the same regular dialogue as we have with NPDI. I don't know if it will be acceptable by all P5 members, but it is something that it is reflecting within the P5. And I hope that we will be able to structure this type of regular discussion with stepping stone as we do for NPDI. Thank you, Benjamin.
Ambassador Gabriel Sey.
Thank you very much. Can I quickly reflect on the Reagan-Gorbachev issue, if you allow me? First of all, thank you, Jan, for mentioning that you're working on a P5 statement. I think that will be very much welcomed. And if we come to a high-level statement, whatever form, and maybe, you know, it draws upon a statement which might come out today, we don't know, but it has to be geared to the 21st century. And in this sense, I'm in line with Jan. We're living in another time, but the essence of that statement is probably still the same, but we have to look at the 21st century we are living in. The question on no first use looks a very simple question, but if you analyze it, it's not so simple. I think you have to link it up with Doctrines, which was already mentioned. And also what Jamie brought up, which is the risk reduction measures. To think, for instance, in the time lag of responding or using nuclear weapons, that could be a concrete measure. The other element is we have nuclear states which are not in the NPT context. So if you have a no-use agreement, whether it is between NATO and Russia or NATO and China, which as such would be welcome, we also have to deal with the nuclear states which are not part of the NPT context, and to see whether they can also be persuaded in something like a no first use. But it should be a no first use which is meaningful. It's not meaningful if it's just a statement, but it's not, how do I say it, implemented by concrete measures. And these measures should be, in my view, have to do with doctrines, but certainly with risk reduction measures, concrete measures, which we all know, which will diminish the risk of using, or if you want, first use. That would be my answer. And then on the last, but I'm looking at you, Mr. Hautecouverture, was the question of William Albuquerque, but it's really nice. He is online. Thank you very much. Shall we do it later, or do you want me to go into this at this moment?
No, Ambassador, you can do it now, because I was about to ask the questions. Please, yes. And thank you, William, for that.
Yeah, thank you very much, William. I think it's a very interesting question. I wrote down in what groups the Netherlands is participating. Stay with me. The broadly like-minded group, NPDI, EU, NATO, CD, the Bureau of this review cycle, the Stockholm Initiative, the CENT, which is the US initiative, IPNDV, and we are not part of the Quad, and we're not part of the P5. But I fully agree with William. Yes, let 1,000 flowers bloom, because what we need is a lot of dialogue with all parties involved. And then going to Jamie's intervention, having also the civil society and on board. So let's have these discussions. The more opinions, the more people are engaged, and not only academics, but also the public at large, the better I think it is, because this is a matter for all of us, not only for the states which are part of the NPT, but it's important for all of us. And I think that's why also all the eyes are now on Geneva. Well, not on us today, but on 2 other people here in Geneva. So thank you very much for that.
Jamie, of course, if you want to add and to answer to one of or another questions which was raised, absolutely, please do.
Sure.
Before I launch the second wave of questions, okay?
Great. Yeah, I'll actually be happy to jump in on that last one. I agree with the Ambassador. I think it's, you know, really great to have all of these forums and ensure there's a whole host of dialogue among different groupings, right? You know, each state is bringing a unique perspective to this. One thing I would caution against is just taking a look at who are the players in the room, right? You know, there are some states that are members to the NPT, but don't necessarily have the staffing or the resources to work on these issues on a day-to-day basis. And so making sure that we're also making efforts to include those voices as well. And some of that, again, can be facilitated through civil society participation, but just, you know, making sure that those underrepresented voices are also part of these discussions, I think is key. And then there was a question as well, Benjamin, I think, on including the P9, as it were, you know, all of the nuclear armed states. I'd be happy to comment on that as well, just based on our project, as I mentioned, in that first track 2 workshop that we held. So all civil society participants, we did include representatives from both India and Pakistan. And for us, you know, we thought that that would be a great opportunity to kind of test drive this idea of including some more nuclear armed states beyond the P5. But what we saw was that it might not be the time to do so, right? So we found that these particular representatives were really getting stuck on regional issues that didn't apply to the full multilateral P5 forum. And so that takes me back to my point of, you know, there are particular initiatives and problems and issues that should be addressed in these multilateral spaces. But there are also ones that need to be addressed bilaterally. So I would just recommend thinking critically about that before trying to include additional players into the P5 process in particular.
Thank you, Jamie. There is also a question. Well, we have many questions. Well, so many questions. There is one of the first ones was asked by our good friend Plaven Pantev, and his point was related to the Iranian and North Korean proliferation cases, and he asked this. He asked, how does the P5 assess its efficiency relative to the Iran nuclear ambitions and North Korea's performance in the military nuclear field? So I think that the efficiency of the P5 is not directly linked, of course, with these 2 crises, but I think it's worth mentioning that, well, and it would be a question from my side. Or to what extent are these proliferation crises are addressed in the P5 in a P5 format, and to what extent has it been useful so far? This is a real question, since Ambassador Wong, you said that it was of the last forum in which the P5 can gather to talk about strategic issues, and Iran and North Korea are the 2 biggest strategic issues in the world today. So maybe a question for Ambassador Wong, and also for Ambassador VLC and for Jamie. Thanks.
Should I start, Benjamin? Yes, okay. Yeah, thank you very much for this question. Well, as I said, within the P5, we have regular agenda items, standing agenda items on the 3 pillars, you know, because we address the NPT always in the 3 pillars. So not only on nuclear disarmament, which is an important one, of course, for which there is a high level of expectations, but we also believe that these, and it's well known that these 3 pillars are interlinked, and which is the basic concept of the NPT. So what we are doing at principles level, I insist, we have regular, principles have regular discussions on proliferation crisis on Iran and DPRK. I won't disclose, of course, the content of these discussions because there's a high level of confidentiality with this, on these discussions. But what I can say is that it is high in the agenda, and principals really want to discuss that and to see if this P5 framework could contribute to other discussions which takes place in other formats on Iran in particular. So, well, of course, yes, the answer is yes. And we are discussing that. And we are also trying to give some views for the REFCON on these different aspects. On DPRK is more complicated. On Iran is also not easy. I want to say that last year we didn't have any principals meeting because of the COVID. And because principals are, and it's understandable, are reluctant to meet with virtual means because of these confidentialities that we need to preserve. So we didn't have this discussion last year in 2020. But before that, I was in London, I was in New York, and it was high in our agenda. Thank you very much.
Ambassador Gabriel C.
Thank you very much. Well, on proliferation, there's always, this evaluation whether the NPT is a success with respect to non-proliferation or not. And then we're always looking at these cases. Personally, I still think it is a success on non-proliferation. With Iran, to go back to the NPT review process, it's good that the P5 discusses these delicate issues, but it's not only for the P5, it's for the whole review process. This is what we call the regional issues. And the regional issues, and certainly these two, will be on the agenda. And let's hope that we have a common approach or a kind of a consensus how to evaluate these processes. They're completely different. We know for Iran, we had the JCPOA process. There are some initiatives to restart it. Let's hope it will be successful. With DPRK, we have a completely different situation because they stepped out of the NPT and they developed nuclear weapons. And we have seen, let's say, the bilateral diplomatic initiative under the Trump administration. So we have to see what comes out of it, but there is a responsibility for all of us in the NPT context to deal with this. And then to end here, I fully agree with Jan. The three pillars are fully interlinked. You cannot get one out or get more attention. All three pillars, that's the strength of the NPT, and they're fully interlinked. And we should also, in the review process and for the outcome, that has to be a part of the outcome. Thank you very much.
Merci, Ambassador. Jamie, please.
Not much to add on this one. I would just echo a lot of those comments and refer you back to one of our recommendations of setting out this vision for the next 50 years of the NPT and making sure that we are addressing these non-proliferation issues effectively, efficiently, and cooperatively. And that can be, kind of the guiding light of that pillar, if you will, to ensure that we're continuing to make progress in these areas.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. I would like to relay two specific questions to Ambassador Wang related to the P5 process. First, one of our guests asked, when was the last meeting and how many times did the P5 met after September last year and on what format? Well, it's worth mentioning and for all of us. And another question is linked with China. Did China, Ambassador Wang, present to the P5, to the other countries, the P5, its non-first use doctrine, and how was it received? and which is linked to what you have already mentioned, the reality, the substance, the strategic meaning of wording, of doctrines, of words, in fact, and how these words have been received and are being received in the P5 format coming from China. Thanks.
Thank you, Benjamin. On your first question, we had last year, because of the COVID and because of the postponement of the NPT RevCon, we had no choice than to slow down our meetings with the P5 because it was complicated to engage in a virtual through virtual means. So we waited not only for NPT, it was the case for other processes. We had this very weird period that we did not know what to do, and we met only to see when we are going to meet. So it was a bit strange discussion, but it was across the board, not only with the P5. So last year it was a bit particular, and we succeeded to restart P5 meetings in person in Geneva at experts level. So these regular meetings on thematic, on certain thematics discussion like FMCT, risk reduction, transparency, etc., glossary, peaceful users, doctrines, doctrine side events, because our ambition is to organize presentation of our respective doctrines during a specific side event during the RevCon. So we are meeting on a regular basis in Geneva to work on that. But regarding the principles, as I said, last year we had nothing because it was impossible for them to travel. Simply, it's a pure logistic problem. It's not a political problem. It's a logistic problem, and because it is very likely that the RevCon will be postponed to next year. Now we know that it won't take place in August. We believe in Paris that we need, in any case, a principals meeting before summer break. So what we are planning to do is to organize a P5 principals conference in July. And because of the necessity to meet at principals level, and because there won't be sanitary conditions to travel in Paris, we will do that through virtual means, but it will be an exception. And our plan also is to, I will do the job, I think, or maybe my principal will do the job, is to debrief NPDI after these virtual meetings. So you will receive, Rob, an invitation for that meeting. No first use. Yes, thank you very much for this question. Well, China always presents no first use as a panacea for doctrines in all formats, everywhere, and including, of course, in P5 meetings. When we exchange doctrines, China has 3 words only to present is no first use. So, of course, the game is to challenge them on these doctrines for which we have a certain number of questions, because, okay, 3 words is fine, but maybe it's not enough to dispel any all concerns regarding their capacities, regarding their transparency efforts. So we question them, and we receive answers. Sometimes it's not satisfactory enough, so we continue the discussion, the dialogue, the conversation with China in order to see if this no first use doctrine is sincere, is valid from a point of view, and if it is conducive for real strategic stability in this part of the world. So this is where we are, and we continue the dialogue. Once again, no first use is a well-known, doctrine from China, but the French position is that it is a bit surprising that it is marketed like that, and that some, countries and some civil societies, research analyses, and take that as a sort of panacea for resolving all problems when it comes to strategic stability. We think that it's very more complicated like that, much more complicated like that. So we'll continue this discussion. I hope that I have answered your question, Benjamin.
Merci beaucoup, Ambassadeur. Two things. First, two comments, a comment by our very good colleague from the ELN, Andreas Persbo, who has to leave. He thanked all of us for the good work. Thank you, Andreas, and see you very soon. A very comment from a good colleague from Santiago, who fully agrees with the Netherlands approach, participating in many and overlapping fora, like-minded groupings and arenas to move nuclear disarmament. Dialogue and more dialogue are badly needed, and he sends us his humble congratulations to all of us from Santiago. Thank you very much, sir or madam. We have congratulations for a very substantive presentation. Jamie, this is for you, and a question also, which is linked. Your references to the PTPNW are very welcome, Claudio says. And how do you think the EIF and progressive consolidation of the treaty will impact on discussions on nuclear disarmament within the context of the NPT and on the dialogue process among nuclear weapon states? Jamie, would you like to answer?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Good.
Great. So first and foremost, I would turn you to some very clear statements that the P5 have released. So their P5 joint statement on the TPNW, as well as NATO's communique from just a couple of days ago. I believe it's in paragraph 47 in the NATO communique, where the states very clearly state that the TPNW will not apply to non-members, that it will not be national customary law, and that the NATO states, and again in the P5 joint statement, do not adhere to the treaty. But as I said, in my comments, I think it will be really important that these states do not actively denigrate the TPNW, and importantly, that they engage with the motivations behind the treaty and the reasons why some states have sought to join the treaty, obviously enough to allow the treaty to enter into force. I think in particular, it will be important for the US, France, and UK as key members of the P5 and also of NATO to recognize the domestic pressure that a lot of their European colleagues are facing, through parliaments and through civil society actors, really putting pressure on governments to, even just attend the TPNW first meetings of states parties as an observer. And I think that's a critical issue that, these NATO allies in particular should be discussing and trying to address, again, effectively and cooperatively, to ensure that it still comes quite clearly that NATO's consensus is that they're not prepared to enter this treaty because of some very real criticisms around verification and implementation of the treaty, but that they do really need to address some of these realities of what their colleagues are facing on the ground. So going to the NPT context in particular, again, I really hope that this will not be a sticking point in reaching success at the conference, whatever that might look like. And some of that responsibility is definitely on the nuclear weapon states and not, actively criticizing it, but also on, members of the TPNW and civil society proponents of the TPNW, not allowing it to become that sticking point as well.
Merci, Jamie. There is also a point about the, very, let's say, standard question of de-alerting. Is anyone discussing de-alerting as a way to diminish risk and as a step to disarmament? It's not a new one, it's a traditional one, but maybe it's a good moment to hear you Ambassador Gabriel C. and Ambassador Wang about it. What would you say, Ambassador Gabriel C. first?
I think Jamie and I already touched upon the alerting as an important measure. So if it's to make a statement, it's one of the measures to be contemplated. Yes, I hope also in the P5, but also in the NPDI context or in the review context. I mean, we could also, stress this. It's not only the alerting. I mean, I wrote down a few things which we already touched upon, which is risk reduction, which is transparency, which is verification, and all of this, with the aim of having more trust and reaching more agreement to reach this goal of further and steps towards this disarmament. So my answer is yes, de-alerting should be part of this list, which we should try as an objective, but as a step. And you might call it a stepping stone, one of the stepping stones to reach the ultimate goal. So yes, I believe it is an important aspect of those stepping stones which we strive, all of us. Thanks.
Okay, good to hear it directly. Ambassador Wang, just before Ambassador Wang, you could have some time to answer that. I just recall that our colleague from Santiago is Ambassador Alfredo Labbé, who is a member of the UNGE on nuclear disarmament and verification. My respect, Ambassador. And there is one question. Well, first, Ambassador Wang, on the alerting, maybe sure, even shortly. Thanks.
Yes, I have to unmute my microphone. No, on the alerting, very shortly. I want to answer on behalf of the P5 because it's we have different respective situation between among the P5 on that. On the French side, we don't have any nuclear weapons in alert. So we simply that I just want to give you this very simple answer. And we refuse this direct link between the alerting and risk reduction. We think that there is no logic link between these two issues. Maybe Benjamin, because I just want, because I've checked on the chat box that there is a reaction from one of our Chinese colleagues. I have to apologize vis-à-vis China when I say that Chinese doctrines is 3 words. Of course, it's not. It's much more complicated than that. And I thank the Chinese to be very to elaborate on the doctrines. There's many papers coming from China explaining their doctrines, and it cannot be simplified in 3 words. Obviously, what I wanted to say is that sometimes these 3 words are taken up by research institute, by some countries, only these 3 words, and thinking that it could be applied to all nuclear weapon states in a uniform way. And I think this is here that we have a problem, because we have it's complicated. It would be a fantasy to believe that we have all the same situation. We have the same. We don't have the same geography first. So, China is a big country. US is a huge country. Russia, it's the biggest country in the world. France is a very small country, territory. And I'm saying that because if you dip into the question of doctrines, you will see that you have to take into account all these factors. Geography, capacities, history, words. This is very complicated. This is an expert conversation, and it has many dimensions that we need to take into account. It's why we have these conversations. But once again, I apologize vis-à-vis China. I didn't want to simplify the Chinese doctrine. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Wang, for these specifications and clarifications. And I must say that it is exactly the way I understood you, but it's better when said. Okay, good. We had also a question linked with the regional issue within the review process of the treaty, asked by Osama Ali. He asked, does the P5 discuss the implementation of the 1995 resolution on the Middle East in the framework of the NPT, and how does P5 envisage the 2019 conference held by the UN Secretary General on the Middle East WMD free zone, of course, in its relation to the NPT Review Conference? I know we all know this is a very historic, long process with the failure of the LCK conference a few years ago, and so on and so forth, and other initiatives ongoing. So what's about this regional issue within the P5? Is it something on the agenda of the P5? Ambassador Wang, and maybe Ambassador Gabriel C, if it's not on the agenda, or whether it is or not, should it be one of the points to be raised among the P5 countries? Thanks.
Thank you, Benjamin. Yes, we exchanged views in 2019, if I remember correctly. Yes, when there was this proposal to launch this conference on Middle East. So we exchanged views, but without with no conclusions. With no willing to striving to reach common position on that, because we had divergent views of the opportunity to launch such conferences, but we simply exchanged views on that. And it was in the margin of the first committee, because in the first committee we also have, at the beginning of the first committee, UNGA, we have a principals meeting just at the beginning. Thank you.
Okay. Ambassador Gabriel C, what do you think of that? And also, Jamie, what do you think of the role of the P5 related to the Middle East WMD Free Zone initiative and process, I would say?
No, as you said, it's a long process, and it started already in the last century. It's good the P5 exchange notes on this. I think nobody would expect they come to an agreement on this. In the meantime, a conference has been launched, and we should be careful that this issue will not overshadow the next review meeting. I mean, it was in the last time 5 years ago, so that was a big issue. I think it's still there. It's unresolved, and well, we think that all the parties concerned in the region should be part of it and should be part of the equation. But we know it is a sticky issue. It's not an easy issue. It's not easy to resolve, but we should be careful that this will not again overshadow the review process like it was 5 years ago. Thanks.
I would just echo those remarks. I think, it's really important that it doesn't become the sticking issue, and that the states in the region are critical players in putting this together.
Thank you very much, Jamie. And this was the word of the end of our webinar. We have so many comments and questions, but it is 4:30, and I could not, I committed to stop our webinar at 4:30, so I have to, and I'm sorry for that. There was an interesting post in the chat for everyone on no first use issue. There is a global platform on this issue, as you can see on the chat. So maybe you have time to take the link on the web. And here we are. And I think that with more than 150 people in the virtual room, with so many questions, with so very smart answers, I think it was a great success. I really thank you very much, Jamie, Ambassador Gabriel C, Ambassador Wang, for playing the game fully with us. Again, it is the beginning of a process led by the FRS. First webinar now, a second webinar maybe this summer on the specific issue of risk reduction. I think I will have just to specify this with my colleagues, but it might be the second topic for our series. And again, we have now a dedicated page on our website. Go and have a look, and if you have good ideas to submit in smart papers, short papers on very specific issues linked to the P5 within the NPT review process till the RevCon, hopefully one day, please be welcome. Thank you very much, and stay safe. One day we will see physically, I'm sure. Bye-bye.